When my husband of 37 years took his last breath, I was holding his cold hand with tears streaming down my face. But behind me, I heard her breathing, shallow, excited breaths, as she waited for me to leave his hospital room, so she could take my place. 3 days later at his funeral, she had the nerve to whisper in my ear that all his money would be hers. 1 week after that, I watched her faint when the will was read, and that's when I realized that revenge isn't served cold, it's served with a side of public humiliation. If you're watching this, hit subscribe and comment below with the biggest betrayal you've ever experienced. Trust me, by the end of the story, you'll feel a whole lot better about yours. I never thought I'd be telling this story. Not at my age. Not after everything I'd built. My name is Eleanor Blackwood, and for nearly 4 decades, I was Mrs. Richard Blackwood, wife of the most respected real estate developer in Meridian Heights. We had the big house on Oakwood Drive, the country club membership, and the kind of marriage everyone envied. At least, that's what I thought. The day Richard died wasn't unexpected. Cancer's like that. It gives you time to prepare, to say goodbye. What I wasn't prepared for was watching Vivian Cross stride into the hospital room 20 minutes after he flatlined, her stiletto heels clicking against the linoleum like some kind of countdown. "Is he gone?" she asked, not even looking at me, her eyes fixed on his still body. I nodded, unable to form words through my grief. "Good," she said, placing her designer handbag on the chair beside his bed. "I need a moment alone with him." I remember standing there, stunned, as this woman, young enough to be our daughter, dismissed me from my own husband's deathbed. My mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask, though deep down I already knew. She smiled then, a predator's smile. "I'm the woman who's kept him happy for the last 8 years. The woman he called when he couldn't stand another minute in that mausoleum you call a home." The nurse who had been adjusting the monitors gasped, her eyes darting between us. "Mrs. Blackwood, would you like me to call security?" the nurse asked, her hand already reaching for the phone. But I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I want to hear what she has to say." Vivian laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Eleanor. Always so proper, aren't you? Always so concerned with appearances." She ran a red-tipped finger along Richard's arm. "He hated that about you. Said it was like living with a mannequin." Each word felt like a slap, but I stood my ground. "And what did he tell you about me, exactly?" "Everything," she purred. "How you two hadn't shared a bed in years. How you cared more about your charity committees than your marriage. How he stayed with you out of obligation, not love." I thought of all the nights Richard had come home late, smelling of a perfume that wasn't mine. All the business trips that seemed to multiply year after year. The distant look in his eyes when I tried to talk about our future. "If he was so miserable with me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "why didn't he leave?" Vivian's smile faltered for just a moment. "He was going to. After he finalized the Riverside development deal. He promised me." The nurse was openly staring now, her paperwork forgotten. "Well," I said, gathering my purse and Richard's personal effects, "I suppose we'll never know if he meant to keep that promise." As I walked toward the door, Vivian called after me. "He changed his will, you know. Last month. I was there when he signed it." I paused but didn't turn around. "Then I guess we'll both find out what that means at the reading." I spent the next 3 days in a fog, moving through the motions of planning Richard's funeral. Our daughter, Claire, flew in from Seattle with her husband and children. Our son, Michael, arrived from Boston, his face grim and unreadable. I hadn't told them about Vivian yet. How could I? How do you tell your children that their father had been living a double life? But I didn't have to tell them. Vivian did it for me when she showed up at the visitation in a dress more suited to a cocktail party than a funeral, dripping in jewelry I recognized as gifts I thought Richard had given me but had mysteriously gone missing over the years. "Mom," Claire whispered, gripping my arm as Vivian sauntered toward Richard's open casket. "Who is that woman? And why is she wearing Grandma's diamond brooch?" Before I could answer, Michael stepped between us and Vivian. "Excuse me," he said, his lawyer's voice clipped and controlled. "This is a private family gathering. Vivian didn't even look at him, her eyes fixed on me over his shoulder. "I am family," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Or I was about to be. "Isn't that right, Eleanor?" The room fell silent. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, friends, neighbors, business associates, all waiting for my response. "Claire, Michael," I said calmly, though my heart was racing, "this is Vivian Cross. Apparently, she and your father were close." Michael's face darkened with understanding. Claire gasped. "That's one way of putting it," Vivian said with a smirk. "Another way would be to say I was the love of his life." Claire lunged forward, but her husband caught her arm. "You lying witch," she hissed. Vivian merely laughed, the sound echoing obscenely in the hushed funeral home. "Ask your mother if I'm lying. Ask her about all those late nights and business trips." I felt something shift inside me then. A lifetime of keeping up appearances, of swallowing pain and indignity for the sake of peace, crumbled away. In its place rose a cold, clear anger. "What I know," I said, my voice carrying across the room, "is that my husband is dead and you're making a spectacle at his funeral. If you had any real feelings for Richard beyond what he could buy you, you would behave with dignity now." For a moment, Vivian seemed taken aback. Then her eyes narrowed. "Dignity? That's rich coming from a woman who couldn't keep her husband interested. Tell me, Eleanor, how long has it been since he touched you? Since he looked at you with anything but obligation?" Michael stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists, but I placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Security," I called, and two men who had been standing discreetly by the door moved toward us. "Please escort Ms. Cross out. She's not welcome here." "You can't do that," Vivian protested as the men approached. "I have every right to be here." "Actually," I said, feeling a strange calm descend over me, "as Richard's legal wife and the one who arranged the service, I can. Goodbye, Vivian." As security led her toward the exit, she twisted in their grip to face me one last time. "This isn't over, Eleanor. When the will is read, you'll see who really mattered to him." After she was gone, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then Claire took my hand and squeezed it. "Mom, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said, squeezing back. "Your father made his choices. Now we all have to live with them." But even as I spoke those brave words, I felt hollow inside. Had Richard really changed his will? Had he really been planning to leave me? After nearly 4 decades of marriage, was I about to lose everything? My home, my security, my dignity, to this woman who had slithered into our lives? The day of Richard's funeral dawned bright and clear, mocking my dark mood. I dressed in a simple black suit, fastened the pearl necklace Richard had given me on our 25th anniversary, and prepared to bury my husband. The church was filled to capacity. Richard had been well respected in the community, his developments having transformed Meridian Heights from a sleepy suburb to a thriving small city. The mayor gave a speech. The head of the Chamber of Commerce recalled Richard's contributions. Our old friend Thomas, who had known Richard since college, shared stories that made even me smile through my tears. And through it all, Vivian sat in the back row, her red dress a beacon of disrespect, her eyes never leaving me. After the service, as I bent over Richard's coffin one last time, I felt her presence before I heard her. That cloying perfume, the same scent I detected on Richard's shirt so many times, enveloped me. "Now all his money is mine, old woman," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. "The house, the company, everything. He promised me." I turned slowly to face her, aware of the crowd watching us. "If that's true," I said quietly, "then there's nothing I can do about it. But know this, whatever he gave you, it wasn't his heart. That stopped beating long before he met you." Something flickered in her eyes. Anger, perhaps, or uncertainty. But then she smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "Tell yourself whatever you need to sleep at night, Eleanor. But we both know who won in the end." As she walked away, her hips swaying dramatically, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Thomas, his eyes sad but determined. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "there's something you should know. About Richard's will. My heart skipped a beat. He changed it, didn't he? For her? Thomas glanced around to make sure we weren't overheard. Yes and no. He did make changes, but... He hesitated. It's complicated. I think you should prepare yourself for Friday. Friday. The will reading. Just 3 days away. Thomas, please, I begged, gripping his arm. I need to know what I'm facing. Is she telling the truth? Did he leave everything to her? Thomas covered my hand with his. I can't give you specifics. Attorney-client privilege. But I can tell you this. Richard wasn't quite the man either of you thought he was. With that cryptic statement, he moved away to join the procession to the cemetery, leaving me more confused and frightened than ever. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I barely slept. I couldn't eat. Every time the phone rang or there was a knock at the door, I jumped, terrified it was Vivian coming to stake her claim on my home. Claire and Michael tried to distract me, filling the house with their worried chatter and half-hearted attempts at normalcy. But I could see the fear in their eyes, too. Fear that their inheritance, the company Michael had been groomed to take over, the house Claire had grown up loving, might be snatched away by this woman who had appeared out of nowhere. On Thursday night, the evening before the will reading, I couldn't stand the tension anymore. I sent the children out to dinner together, promising I'd be fine for a few hours alone. As soon as they left, I poured myself a glass of Richard's expensive scotch, something I never drank, and took it to his study. I sat in his leather chair, the one he'd spent countless evenings in, ostensibly working late, but probably texting Vivian. The familiar sense of his cologne and pipe tobacco still lingered in the room, and for a moment, grief overtook my anger and fear. "Damn you, Richard," I whispered, tears sliding down my cheeks. "How could you do this to us? To me?" In a sudden fit of rage, I yanked open his desk drawer, not sure what I was looking for, evidence of his affair, perhaps, or some explanation for his betrayal. Instead, I found a small velvet box with a note attached. My hands trembling, I opened the note. It was in Richard's handwriting. "For Eleanor, on the day of my funeral. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll understand why I did what I did. All my love, R." Inside the box was a rosary, delicate, antique, with beads of mother-of-pearl and a silver crucifix. It was identical to one my grandmother had owned, which I'd always admired but had been lost years ago. I clutched it to my chest, confusion warring with the remnants of love I still felt for the man who had been my partner for most of my adult life. What did this mean? Was this a last-minute attack of conscience? Or part of some deeper game? The next morning, I dressed with particular care for the will reading. A navy blue suit that I knew made me look dignified and strong. The pearl necklace again. And, tucked into my pocket, the rosary Richard had left me. Thomas's law office was on the top floor of the Blackwood building, Richard's first major development in Meridian Heights. As the elevator climbed, I tried to steady my breathing, to prepare myself for whatever was coming. The conference room was already full when I arrived. Michael and Claire sat on one side of the long table, their spouses beside them. Richard's elderly sister, Margaret, was there, looking bewildered and sad. And across from my children, looking triumphant in another inappropriately flashy outfit, sat Vivian. "Eleanor," Thomas greeted me, rising from his seat at the head of the table. "Please sit down." I took the empty chair beside Claire, who immediately grasped my hand under the table. "Now that everyone is here," Thomas began, "we can proceed with the reading of Richard Blackwood's last will and testament." Vivian straightened in her seat, a smile playing at the corners of her red lips. Thomas cleared his throat and began to read. Standard legal language flowed past: revocation of previous wills, appointment of executors, instructions for funeral expenses. And then came the distribution of assets. "To my beloved wife, Eleanor," Thomas read, his voice steady, "I leave the following: our primary residence at 47 Oakwood Drive, including all furnishings and personal property therein." Vivian's smile faltered slightly, but she remained confident, clearly expecting the bigger assets, the company, the real estate holdings, the investment accounts, to come to her. Additionally, Thomas continued, I leave to Eleanor all shares of Blackwood Development Corporation to manage or dispose of as she sees fit. A small gasp escaped Vivian's lips. All bank accounts, investment portfolios, retirement funds, and insurance policies which name me as the primary account holder or beneficiary shall pass to Eleanor in their entirety. Vivian's face had gone pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. To my children, Michael and Claire, Thomas read on, I leave the sum of $5 million each to be held in trust and distributed according to the terms outlined in Appendix B. Michael and Claire exchanged shocked glances. It was far more than they had expected. To my sister, Margaret, I leave the sum of $2 million and my collection of first edition books, which she always admired. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, visibly moved. And finally, Thomas said, his voice taking on a different tone, to Vivian Cross. The room went silent. Vivian leaned forward, a desperate hope still visible in her eyes. I leave the sum of $1, Thomas read, and the following message. Vivian, you came into my life at a time when I was weak and foolish. You made me believe that what we had was special, that you cared for me as a man, not as a means to an end. It was only in my final months, as I faced my own mortality, that I saw the truth. You never loved me. You loved what I could give you, what you hoped I would give you. Vivian's face crumpled, her carefully applied makeup suddenly garish against her pallor. I want you to know, Thomas continued reading Richard's words, that I considered leaving you something substantial, not because you deserved it, but because I was ashamed of how I had betrayed my wife, my family, and myself with you. But in the end, I decided that the greatest gift I could give was the truth. And the truth is, you were never going to be my wife. You were never going to have my fortune. And now, you will have nothing but this dollar as a reminder of your greatest failure. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the tick of the wall clock, the hum of the air conditioning, the shallow, panicked breathing coming from Vivian. This can't be right, she finally said, her voice thin and reedy. He promised me. He promised me. Her voice rose to a shriek on the last words. The will is quite clear, Miss Cross, Thomas said firmly, and I can assure you it was executed with all legal formalities. Richard was of sound mind when he signed it 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. Vivian's eyes widened. But he told me, he said. She turned to me, her beautiful face contorted with rage. You did this. Somehow you did this. I shook my head slowly. I knew nothing about it. I said truthfully. Nothing at all. And that's when it happened, just like in the movies. Vivian's eyes rolled back in her head, and she slumped forward, unconscious, her forehead hitting the polished conference table with a dull thud. For a moment, no one moved. Then Claire's husband, a doctor, rushed to Vivian's side, checking her pulse and lifting her eyelids. She's fainted, he announced. Probably shock. She'll be fine in a few minutes. As they tended to Vivian, I sat perfectly still, a strange calmness washing over me. All the fear and uncertainty of the past days drained away, replaced by a single, crystal-clear thought. Richard had known. Somehow, in the end, he had known exactly what kind of woman Vivian was. Thomas caught my eye across the table and gave me a small, sad smile. Later, I would ask him about those final weeks, about Richard's change of heart. But for now, it was enough to know that I hadn't lost everything. That despite his betrayal, Richard had, in the end, chosen to protect me and our family. As Vivian began to stir, moaning softly, I stood up. I think I'd like to go home now, I said to no one in particular. It's been a very long week. Michael immediately rose to accompany me. I'll drive you, Mom. As we walked toward the door, Vivian's voice, weak but venomous, stopped me. This isn't over, Eleanor. Do you hear me? This isn't over. I turned to look at her one last time, this woman who had thought to replace me, to steal my life. Yes, Vivian, I said quietly. It is. But even as I spoke those words, a chill ran down my spine. Because the look in Vivian's eyes wasn't just anger or disappointment. It was hatred.
Pure, un dilute da thread.
And I knew, with absolute certainty, that she meant exactly what she said. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The ride home with Michael was quiet. He kept glancing at me, opening his mouth as if to speak, then closing it again. Finally, as we pulled into the driveway of the house I now knew was securely mine, he turned off the engine and faced me. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "did you know about Dad and her?" I looked at the beautiful home Richard and I had shared for 30 years. The gardens I had lovingly tended. The windows through which I had watched our children grow. I suspected, I admitted, for years. But I never knew for certain, and I never confronted him. Michael frowned. Why not? It was a fair question, one I had asked myself countless times over the years. Because I was afraid, I said simply. Afraid of losing everything we'd built. Afraid of being alone at my age. Afraid of the scandal, the pity, the whispers. I sighed deeply. And maybe, in some way, I was afraid of knowing the truth. As long as I didn't know for certain, I could pretend it wasn't happening. Michael reached over and took my hand.
I'm sorry, Mom.
I had no idea. No one did, I said. That was the point. We sat in silence for another moment. Then Michael asked the question I knew had been on his mind since the will reading. What are you going to do now? About the company, I mean. I smiled at my son, this ambitious, capable young man who had always expected to take over his father's business someday. Don't worry, Michael. Nothing has to be decided today. We have time to figure it all out. He nodded, relieved, and we went inside together. The house felt different somehow. Lighter, as if a long shadow had been lifted. For the first time in years, I walked through the rooms without wondering where Richard was, what he was doing, who he was with. He was gone, and while that brought its own deep sadness, it also brought a kind of peace. Claire was in the kitchen when we arrived, already making coffee. How are you doing, Mom? She asked, her eyes searching my face for signs of distress. I'm okay, I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. It's been a shock, all of it, but I'll be okay. That woman, Claire said, her voice hardening. I can't believe she had the nerve to show up like that, expecting to take everything. People will do a lot of things for money, I said, accepting the cup of coffee she handed me. And I think for Vivian it wasn't just about the money. It was about winning. Michael snorted. Well, she certainly didn't win today. No, I agreed. She didn't. We spent the evening together, the three of us, talking about Richard. The good memories, the happy times, carefully avoiding the shadow that had darkened his final years. It felt important, somehow, to remember him as the man he had been before Vivian. The father who had taught Michael to fish and Claire to ride a bike. The husband who had once brought me wildflowers every Sunday. After Michael and Claire went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, sipping a glass of wine and thinking about the future. For so long, my identity had been tied to Richard's, Mrs. Blackwood, the developer's wife. Now, suddenly, I was just Eleanor, a widow with a fortune, a company I knew little about, and a life I had to redefine. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. A noise from outside interrupted my thoughts, a car engine, then silence. Curious, I went to the window and peered out. A sleek red convertible was parked at the curb, its headlights off. As I watched, a figure emerged from the driver's side and started toward my house. Even in the dim glow of the streetlights, I recognized that walk, that silhouette.
Vivian.
My heart raced as I watched her approach my front door. What was she doing here? What more could she possibly want? The doorbell rang, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I considered not answering, pretending I was asleep. But some instinct told me it was better to face her now, to end this once and for all. I opened the door to find Vivian swaying slightly on my doorstep, her eyes glassy, the smell of alcohol wafting from her. You, she slurred, pointing an accusatory finger at me. You think you've won, don't you? Vivian, I said calmly, it's late. Go home. She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Home? I don't have a home anymore. The lease on my apartment is up next month, and Richard promised. She broke off, swallowing hard. He promised he'd take care of me. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Whatever arrangements you had with my husband, I said, emphasizing the word my, they died with him. Now please, leave before you embarrass yourself further. She stepped closer, invading my space, her face inches from mine. You don't get it, do you? I know things about Richard. Things that would destroy his precious reputation if they got out. A chill ran through me. What are you talking about? Her smile was ugly, triumphant. The Riverside development? His big final project? Let's just say not all the permits were obtained legally. And I have proof. I felt the blood drain from my face. The Riverside development was Richard's legacy project, a massive mixed-use development that had transformed a rundown industrial area into a thriving community hub. If there had been illegalities involved, you're lying, I said, but without conviction. Vivian shook her head, her smile widening. Am I? Ask yourself why Richard was so desperate to get it approved quickly. Why he spent so much time with certain city officials. Why there was never a proper environmental impact study done. My mind raced. If what she was saying was true, it could mean lawsuits, criminal charges, the collapse of Blackwood development. Everything Richard had built, everything he had left to me and our children, could be destroyed. What do you want, Vivian? I asked, though I already knew the answer. $10 million, she said without hesitation.
Cash.
And I'll give you everything I have, emails, documents, recordings. All of it. And if I refuse? Her eyes gleamed maliciously in the porch light. Then I go to the press. And the district attorney. And by this time next week, the Blackwood name won't be worth the paper it's printed on. I stood very still, my mind working furiously. Was she bluffing? Could Richard really have done what she was suggesting? And even if he had, did she actually have proof? I need time to think, I said finally. Vivian laughed. Of course you do. I'll give you 3 days. After that, I start making phone calls. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, pressing it into my hand. My cell number. Don't keep me waiting, Eleanor. As she turned to leave, she paused, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between hatred and pity. You know what the funny thing is, she said. In the beginning, Richard talked about leaving you. He really did. But then he'd always find some reason to put it off. After this deal, he'd say. After the holidays. After the kids' visit. I used to think it was because he was weak. But now I wonder if maybe, in his own twisted way, he actually loved you. And with that parting shot, she was gone, her red car roaring to life and speeding away into the night. I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. The card in my hand seemed to burn like a brand. $10 million. Blackmail.
Corruption.
What had Richard done? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? I looked at the business card in my trembling fingers. Written in elegant script was Vivian's name and number, and below that, a company. Cross Consultations. What kind of consultations did Vivian provide? Had that been her cover for seeing Richard all these years? Sleep was impossible after Vivian's visit. I paced the house, my mind racing. Should I call Thomas? The police? Or should I just pay her off and be done with it? No, a voice inside me insisted. No more hiding. No more pretending. Whatever Richard had done, whatever mess he had left behind, I would face it head on. As dawn broke, I made my decision. I wouldn't be blackmailed. I wouldn't be threatened in my own home. And I wouldn't let Vivian destroy what was left of my family. But first, I needed to know if she was telling the truth. With new determination, I showered and dressed, then went to Richard's study. If there was evidence of wrongdoing in the Riverside development, it would be here, in his private files. I spent the morning methodically going through his desk, his filing cabinets, his computer. At first, I found nothing unusual, just the normal paperwork of a successful business. But then, hidden in a false bottom of his desk drawer, I discovered a small leather-bound notebook. The entries were cryptic, dates, initials, and amounts. Large amounts. and beside many of the entries was a small V written in Richard's distinctive handwriting. V for Vivian? Had she been involved in whatever was happening? A knock at the study door made me jump. I quickly hid the notebook under some papers as Claire peeked in. Mom, are you okay? You've been in here for hours. I forced a smile. Just trying to get a handle on your father's business affairs. There's a lot to sort through. Claire came into the room, concern etched on her face. You don't have to do this alone, you know. Michael and I are here to help. I looked at my daughter. So capable, so earnest, so much like Richard in her determination. Could I tell her what I suspected? Could I burden her with the knowledge that her father might have been corrupt as well as unfaithful? Claire, I said carefully, what do you know about the Riverside development? She shrugged. Not much. It was Dad's pet project for the last few years. He was really proud of it, said it would redefine the city. Did he ever mention difficulties with permits? Or environmental studies? Claire's brow furrowed. Not to me, but that's really Michael's area. He worked more closely with Dad on the business side of things. She paused, studying my face. Mom, what's going on? Did something happen? I hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. Vivian came here last night. She made some accusations about your father. About Riverside. Claire's face hardened. And you believed her? After everything she's done? I don't know what to believe, I admitted. That's why I'm trying to find out the truth. Claire sat down across from me, her expression serious. Whatever she told you, it's a lie. She's just trying to get money from you. Can't you see that? She lost at the will reading, so now she's trying another angle. I wanted to believe Claire was right. But the notebook in my desk, with its cryptic entries and large sums, suggested otherwise. Maybe, I said. But I need to be sure. Could you ask Michael to come see me when he wakes up? I'd like to talk to him about Riverside. Claire nodded, though she still looked troubled. Of course. But Mom, please don't let that woman get to you. She's poison. After Claire left, I pulled out the notebook again and continued my investigation. The most recent entries were dated just a few months ago, around the time Richard had received his cancer diagnosis. The amounts were larger, and there were more of them, as if he had been accelerating whatever he was doing. And beside the very last entry was not a V but a full name, Councilman Harris. My blood ran cold. James Harris was the head of the city's planning committee, the very man who had championed the Riverside development through its approval process. The implications were clear and damning. Richard had been bribing city officials, and Vivian had proof. When Michael knocked on the study door an hour later, I had composed myself as best I could. But he knew me too well. What's wrong? He asked immediately. Claire said he wanted to talk about Riverside. I gestured for him to sit down. Michael, I need you to be completely honest with me. Was there anything irregular about how the Riverside development was approved? His face remained carefully neutral. What do you mean by irregular? I mean bribes, Michael. Payoffs.
Corruption.
He didn't answer immediately, and in that hesitation, I saw the truth. Oh God, I whispered. It's true, isn't it? Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Richard that it made my heart ache. Mom, the development business is complicated. Sometimes things need to be expedited. Greased, you might say. Greased, I repeated flatly. You mean bribes?
He winced.
That's a harsh word, but an accurate one, I insisted. Michael, do you realize what this means? If this gets out, everything your father built, everything he left to us, could be destroyed. Michael leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. It won't get out. Dad was careful. Very careful. I thought of Vivian's smug face, her certainty. What if someone has proof? Emails? Documents? Recordings? Michael went very still. Has someone approached you? I hesitated, then decided to trust my son. Vivian came here last night. She's threatening to go to the press and the district attorney unless I pay her $10 million. Michael's face darkened with anger. That bitch. She's the one who set up most of the meetings in the first place. She was Dad's go-between with Harris and the others. This new piece of information stunned me. Vivian was involved? Directly involved? Of course she was, Michael said. How do you think she met Dad in the first place? She wasn't just some random woman he picked up at a bar. She worked for one of the city planners. She saw an opportunity with Dad and took it. My mind reeled with this revelation. Vivian hadn't just been Richard's mistress. She had been his accomplice. His partner in crime, quite literally. So, she's blackmailing us with evidence that would implicate her too? I asked, trying to make sense of it all. Michael nodded grimly. She must be desperate. After the will reading, she probably realized she has nothing left to lose. I thought about this for a moment, turning the new information over in my mind. If she was involved, then she's not just blackmailing us. She's bluffing. She can't go to the authorities without incriminating herself. Maybe, Michael said cautiously, but she could still go to the press anonymously. Plant enough seeds of doubt to trigger an investigation. And once they start digging. He trailed off, but I understood the implication. Once investigators started looking, they would find something. What exactly did your father do, Michael? I asked quietly. I need to know everything. Michael sighed deeply, suddenly looking much older than his 35 years. It started small, expediting permit approvals with gifts, theater tickets, golf outings. Then it escalated to cash for looking the other way on zoning variances for fast-tracking environmental approvals. And Councilman Harris? He was the key. Without him, Riverside would never have happened. The land was contaminated from the old factory that used to be there. A proper cleanup would have cost millions, made the whole project unprofitable. Harris pushed it through without the full environmental assessment. I felt sick. Not just because of the corruption, but because of what it meant. So the land is still contaminated? There are people living there now, Michael. Families. Children. He at least had the grace to look ashamed. The worst areas were cleaned up. The residential sections are safe. It's just not as thorough as it should have been. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to process this betrayal that went so much deeper than I had imagined. Richard hadn't just cheated on me with a younger woman. He had cheated an entire community, potentially putting people's health at risk. Mom, Michael said, rising to follow me. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do with this terrible knowledge? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm not paying Vivian a cent. And I'm not letting her destroy this family either. Michael nodded, relief evident in his face. I'll handle her. She doesn't know that I know about her involvement. I can use that. But I shook my head.
No.
This is my battle. Your father created this mess, and now it's mine to clean up. But I do need your help with something else. Anything, Mom. I need to understand exactly what was done and not done at Riverside. I need to know how bad it really is. Michael hesitated.
Why?
What are you thinking? I met my son's eyes steadily. I'm thinking that it's time for the Blackwood family to start making amends. The look of alarm on Michael's face would have been comical under different circumstances. Mom, you can't be serious. If you start digging into Riverside now, it will raise questions. People will wonder why. It could trigger the very investigation we're trying to avoid. I'm not talking about making a public spectacle, I assured him. But if there are real environmental hazards at Riverside, they need to be addressed. Quietly, discreetly, but thoroughly. Michael ran a hand through his hair again, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. It's risky. So is doing nothing, I countered. What happens if someone gets sick? If the contamination spreads? The scandal would be even worse then, and we'd have the knowledge that we could have prevented it. After a long moment, Michael nodded reluctantly. I'll get you the information. The original environmental reports, the modified ones that were submitted, everything. But Mom, please, don't do anything without talking to me first. I agreed, though in my heart, I was already forming a plan, one that would deal with both the Riverside problem and Vivian. After Michael left, I spent the rest of the day in Richard's study, trying to piece together the extent of his corruption from his files. It was like discovering I had been married to a stranger. The Richard the first thought I knew principled, respected, integrity above all, had been a facade. Behind it lurked a man willing to cut corners, pay bribes, and put profits above people's safety. By evening, I was emotionally exhausted but determined. Tomorrow, I would begin to set things right. But first, I needed to deal with Vivian. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on her card. Well, her voice purred when she answered. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. Have you made a decision? I want to meet, I said, keeping my voice steady. Face to face.
Why?
So you can try to appeal to my better nature? She laughed. Save your breath, Eleanor. This is business. Nevertheless, I prefer to conduct business in person. Unless you're afraid to meet me? There was a pause, and I could almost see her weighing her options, trying to decide if this was a trap. Fine, she said finally. Tomorrow. Noon. The Riverside Cafe. The irony of her chosen location wasn't lost on me. I'll be there. As I hung up, Claire appeared in the doorway of the study, her expression troubled. Was that her? Vivian? I nodded, not bothering to deny it. We're meeting tomorrow. Claire's eyes widened in alarm. Mom, no. You can't trust her. Let me come with you, at least. This is something I need to do alone, I said firmly. But there is something you can help me with. I explained what I needed, and though she was clearly worried, Claire agreed to my plan. By the time I went to bed that night, everything was in place for my meeting with Vivian. The Riverside Cafe sat at the heart of Richard's development, a sleek, modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. As I pulled into the parking lot the next day, I could see Vivian already inside, seated at a table by the window, watching for me. She had dressed for the occasion in a fitted red dress that drew the eye of every man in the place. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless. She looked like a woman who had never known a moment's doubt or insecurity. I, in contrast, had chosen a simple black pantsuit and minimal jewelry. This wasn't about impressing Vivian or competing with her. This was about ending the threat she posed, once and for all. Eleanor, she greeted me with a false smile as I sat down across from her. You're looking well, considering. I ignored the jab. Let's get down to business, shall we? You want $10 million for your silence about Riverside. She nodded, not bothering with pretense. That's right. And in return, you get all the evidence I've collected over the years. Every email, every document, every recording. And why should I believe you'd honor that agreement? What's to stop you from coming back for more once you've spent the money? Vivian leaned forward, her voice low. Because, contrary to what you might think, I'm not stupid. I know when to walk away from a good deal. $10 million is enough to set me up for life, somewhere far from here. I studied her face, trying to see past the mask of confident avarice to the woman beneath. You really loved him, didn't you? The question caught her off guard. For a moment, her perfect facade cracked, revealing something raw and painful underneath. But she quickly recovered. Love had nothing to do with it, she said coldly. Richard was a means to an end, just like you are now. I smiled slightly, having seen what I needed to see. And what was the end, Vivian? Money? Power? Or just the thrill of taking something that belonged to someone else? Her eyes narrowed. Don't psychoanalyze me, Eleanor. It doesn't suit you. Now, do we have a deal or not? I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what was coming next. Before I answer that, there's something you should know. Something about Richard. Despite herself, Vivian looked interested. What about him? He was dying long before the cancer got him, I said quietly. Liver disease. He'd been hiding it for years, managing the symptoms with medications, special diets. That's why he drank so little at functions, why he sometimes looked so tired and gray. Vivian's brow furrowed. That's not true. He would have told me. Would he? Did he tell you about the will? About how he really felt about you? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. You're lying. Trying to distract me. Am I? I reached into my purse and pulled out a medical file, Richard's medical file, which Claire had retrieved from his doctor that morning. See for yourself. Vivian hesitated, then snatched the file from my hand, flipping it open. I watched as her eyes scanned the pages, widening as she absorbed the information. No, she whispered. This can't be right. He was fine.
He was.
Dying. I finished for her.
Slowly, painfully.
The cancer at the end was almost a mercy. It spared him the worst of the liver failure. Vivian closed the file, her hand trembling slightly. Why are you telling me this? What does it have to do with our deal? Because you need to understand something about Richard. He used people, Vivian. All of us. Me for respectability and a family name. You for sex and as a go-between with corrupt officials. He told each of us what we wanted to hear, showed us the face we wanted to see. But in the end, the only person Richard truly loved was himself. Vivian's composure was slipping now, her carefully constructed confidence crumbling. You don't know what we had. You don't know anything about it. I know he promised you the world and left you $1, I said bluntly. I know he used you to facilitate bribes and then discarded you when he was done. And I know that if you go to the press or the district attorney with what you have, you'll be implicated just as much as he would have been. The color drained from Vivian's face. How did you? Michael told me everything. About your role as the go-between. About how you met Richard through your job with the city planner. You're not just a blackmailer, Vivian. You're an accomplice. She sat very still, her mind clearly racing, trying to find a way out of the trap she suddenly found herself in. It's my word against Michael's. And he's as guilty as I am. Perhaps, I conceded. But I have something else. Something Richard left behind. I placed the leather-bound notebook on the table between us. His records of every bribe, every payoff. And your name is all over it, Vivian. Or should I say, your initial is. She stared at the notebook, recognition dawning in her eyes. That's not possible. He kept that locked in his desk. I saw him write in it dozens of times. Yes, in the false bottom drawer. Did you really think I wouldn't find it? That I wouldn't turn over every inch of that house looking for answers after you threatened me? Vivian licked her lips nervously. What do you want? Now, we were getting to it. I want you gone. Out of my life. Out of my family's life. Forever. And the money? I laughed softly. There is no money, Vivian. Not for you. Not anymore. Her face contorted with rage. You bitch. You think you can threaten me? I'll ruin you. I'll ruin all of you. Several people in the cafe turned to stare at her outburst. I remained calm, my voice level. No, you won't. Because if you try, I'll take this notebook and every other piece of evidence I've gathered straight to the district attorney myself. I'll tell them everything about Richard, about the bribes, about your role in all of it. I have nothing to lose, Vivian.
Can you say the same?
She glared at me, hatred burning in her eyes. Why would you do that? It would destroy your family's legacy, your children's inheritance. Some things are more important than money or legacy, I said simply. Like justice. Like doing the right thing, even when it's hard. You're bluffing, she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. I held her gaze steadily. Try me. We sat in silence for a long moment, the tension between us palpable. Then, abruptly, Vivian stood up. This isn't over, she hissed. Not by a long shot. As she stormed out of the cafe, I remained seated, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. It wasn't over, she was right about that. But the balance of power had shifted. For the first time since Richard's death, perhaps for the first time in my marriage, I was in control. I waited until Vivian's car had disappeared from the parking lot before making my next move. Pulling out my phone, I dialed Thomas's number. Eleanor, he answered warmly. How are you holding up? I need your help, Thomas, I said without preamble. It's about Riverside. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was guarded. What about it? I know everything, Thomas. About the bribes, the falsified environmental reports, all of it. And I want to make it right. Another longer pause. Eleanor, are you sure you want to go down this road? The implications for the company, for your family? I'm sure, I said firmly. But I want to do it right. Quietly, legally, with minimal damage to innocent parties. Can you help me? Thomas sighed heavily. Come to my office. We'll talk. An hour later, I sat across from Thomas in the same conference room where the will had been read. His expression was grave as he listened to my plan. It's risky, he said when I finished. Expensive, too. And there's no guarantee it will satisfy the authorities if this ever does come to light. But it's the right thing to do, I insisted. We can't just ignore the potential health hazards at Riverside. People's lives are at stake. Thomas studied me thoughtfully. Richard would never have done this, you know. He would have buried the evidence deeper, paid off whoever needed paying off, and moved on to the next project. I'm not Richard, I said simply. A small smile touched Thomas's lips. No, you're certainly not. And perhaps that's exactly what Blackwood Development needs right now. He straightened in his chair, decision made. All right, I'll help you set up the remediation fund. Anonymously, as you requested. But Eleanor, you need to be prepared for the questions that will come when word gets out that someone is spending millions to clean up contamination that supposedly doesn't exist. I'll handle it, I assured him. Just make sure the work gets done properly this time. As I left Thomas's office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be financial costs, possibly legal ones too. But for the first time since Richard's death, I felt I was doing something that mattered. Something that wasn't just about protecting myself or my family's reputation, but about making a real difference. That feeling of purpose carried me through the next few weeks as I threw myself into learning about Blackwood Development. Michael was initially wary of my involvement, clearly concerned that I might make impulsive decisions that would damage the company. But as he saw my genuine interest and dedication, he began to include me more, explaining the current projects, introducing me to key staff members. I discovered, to my surprise, that I had a knack for the business. My years of managing charity committees and community organizations had given me skills that translated well to corporate leadership, organization, diplomacy, the ability to see the big picture while not losing sight of important details. And as I learned more about the company Richard had built, I also began to see how it could be transformed. Not overnight, but gradually into something more ethical, more community-focused, without sacrificing profitability. The remediation work at Riverside began quietly, disguised as routine infrastructure maintenance. Thomas had set up a shell corporation to fund the work, with no visible connection to the Blackwood family. It would take months, possibly years, to fully address the contamination issues, but each day that passed without incident felt like a small victory. Until the morning Claire burst into my office, her face pale with shock. "Mom," she gasped, "have you seen the news?" I looked up from the project proposals I'd been reviewing. "No, what's happened?" Instead of answering, Claire grabbed the remote and turned on the television mounted on the wall. The local news was playing, and there on the screen was Vivian, standing outside the district attorney's office, microphones thrust in her face. "Can no longer remain silent about the corruption that has poisoned our city," she was saying, her expression a perfect mask of righteous concern. Richard Blackwood may have been respected in this community, but behind the scenes, he was bribing officials, falsifying environmental reports, putting profits above people's health and safety. My heart pounded as I watched, unable to believe what I was seeing. After all my warnings, all my threats, Vivian had gone public anyway. "Ms. Cross," a reporter asked, "you worked closely with Mr. Blackwood. Why are you coming forward now?" Vivian's eyes glistened with what I recognized as fake tears. "Because I can't live with the guilt anymore. I was young, impressionable. I believed in him, in his vision for the city. I didn't understand the corners he was cutting, the laws he was breaking. But now that I do, I have to speak out, no matter the personal cost." "Liar!" Claire shouted at the screen. She was helping him. She knew everything. I shushed her, needing to hear the rest. "And what evidence do you have of these serious allegations?" another reporter asked. Vivian looked directly into the camera, and I could swear she was looking right at me, her smile subtle but triumphant. "I have records, documents, recordings, everything the district attorney needs to prove what Richard Blackwood did, and who helped him do it." The news cut back to the anchors, who began discussing the potential implications of Vivian's claims. I muted the television, my mind racing. "She's crazy," Claire said, pacing the office. She must know this will implicate her too. Why would she do this? Because she has nothing left to lose, I said quietly. And everything to gain. Claire stopped pacing, staring at me in confusion. Gain? How does she gain by confessing to a crime? She's not confessing. She's positioning herself as a whistleblower, a naive young woman led astray by a powerful older man. And she's doing it now, before we can expose her role. But you have Dad's notebook, the evidence of her involvement. I nodded grimly. And she knows that. She's gambling that the district attorney will offer her immunity in exchange for her testimony against bigger fish, like us. So, what do we do? Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Thomas. Eleanor, he said, his voice tense. I assume you've seen the news. I have. What's happening at the DA's office? It's bad. They're taking her claims seriously. I have a contact there who says they're already preparing subpoenas for Blackwood Development's records going back 5 years. My stomach clenched. How much time do we have? Days, maybe. A week at most. Eleanor, you need to decide what you want to do here. If you fight this, it could get very ugly, very public. Criminal charges are a real possibility, not just for Richard's estate, but potentially for Michael and anyone else who is involved. I closed my eyes, thinking of the notebook in my safe, the evidence that could implicate Vivian but would also confirm everything she was saying about Richard, about the company, about the corruption that had been happening under my nose for years while I looked the other way. I need to think, I told Thomas. I'll call you back. After hanging up, I turned to Claire, who was watching me anxiously. Call Michael. Tell him to come here right away. And then I need you to do something else for me. I gave her instructions, and though she looked puzzled, she nodded and left to carry them out. Alone in my office, I stared out the window at the city Richard had helped build, the skyline dotted with Blackwood developments, including Riverside gleaming in the distance. Had it all been built on lies?
En corruption?
And if it had, what did that make me? The woman who had stood by his side all those years, accepting the benefits without asking questions? Michael arrived an hour later, breathless and furious. I saw the news. That manipulative bitch. After everything Dad did for her. Sit down, Michael, I said calmly. We need to talk. He paced instead, too agitated to sit. We need to fight this. Discredit her. She was involved up to her neck, and we can prove it. And in the process, we'll confirm everything she's saying about your father. About the company. Michael stopped pacing, his face flushing. So what? We just let her destroy us? Everything Dad built? Everything he left for us? No, I said. We're going to save what can be saved. But not the way you think. Before Michael could respond, there was a knock at the door, and Claire entered, followed by a man I recognized immediately, James Harris, the city councilman whose name had been in Richard's notebook. Michael stiffened, his eyes widening in alarm. Councilman Harris. This isn't a good time. Harris looked nervous, his usually confident demeanor subdued. Ms. Blackwood insisted it was urgent. It is, I confirmed, gesturing for him to take a seat. Please, Councilman. What we have to discuss affects all of us. Once we were all seated, I looked at each of them in turn, my children, products of Richard's influence in different ways, and Harris, a man who had sold his integrity for what I now knew had been relatively small sums. Vivian Cross has gone to the district attorney with evidence of corruption in the Riverside development. I began. Evidence that implicates not just Richard, but potentially everyone in this room. Harris paled visibly. Mrs. Blackwood, I don't know what you're suggesting, but... Please, I interrupted gently. Let's not waste time with denials. I have Richard's records, Councilman. I know exactly how much he paid you, and for what. He slumped in his chair, the fight going out of him. What do you want from me? I want the truth. And then, I want your help. Harris looked confused. My help? With what? With making things right. I outlined my plan, watching their reactions carefully. Michael was initially resistant, seeing it as a surrender. Claire was thoughtful, considering the implications from all angles. And Harris was simply stunned, clearly having expected threats or demands for his silence. Not what I was proposing. "It's political suicide," he said when I finished. "You're asking me to admit to taking bribes. I'm asking you to help fix a problem you helped create," I corrected. "And yes, there will be consequences. For all of us. But they'll be consequences we choose, rather than ones forced upon us by Vivian Cross or the district attorney. And if I refuse?" I met his gaze steadily. "Then I'll take Richard's notebook to the DA myself. Today. Before Vivian has a chance to cut her deal." Harris stared at me, trying to gauge my resolve. Whatever he saw in my eyes must have convinced him. "I need to talk to my lawyer," he said finally. "Of course. But don't take too long. Events are moving quickly." After Harris left, Michael exploded. "Have you lost your mind? You're talking about confessing to everything. About dragging our family name through the mud. About potentially facing criminal charges." "I'm talking about taking control of the narrative," I corrected him. "About making amends on our terms, not Vivian's. About saving what can be saved of Blackwood development. By destroying it," he demanded incredulously. "By transforming it," I said firmly, "into something we can be proud of. Something built on integrity, not corruption." Claire, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "I think Mom's right, Michael. This is coming out one way or another. At least this way, we have some control over how it happens." Michael looked from her to me, disbelief etched on his face. "I can't believe you're both considering this. Dad would never." "Your father is dead," I cut in sharply. "And his choices have brought us to this point. Now we have to make our own choices." For a moment, I thought Michael might storm out. But instead, he sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "What do you need me to do?" he asked quietly. Relief washed over me. I had been prepared to move forward without his support if necessary, but having both my children with me would make what was coming much easier to bear. "First," I said, "we need to call Thomas. And then we need to prepare for a press conference." The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Thomas arrived with a team of lawyers who worked through the night, drafting statements, preparing documents, outlining the legal strategy that would guide us through the coming storm. I barely slept, my mind too full of what was at stake, of all the lives that would be affected by what we were about to do. Not just my family, but the employees of Blackwood Development, the residents of Riverside, the reputation of the city itself. By morning, everything was in place. The press conference was scheduled for noon, the same time Vivian had chosen for our confrontation at the Riverside Cafe, a coincidence that felt somehow fitting. As I dressed in a simple navy blue suit, I thought about the woman I had been just weeks ago, the grieving widow, shocked by betrayal, terrified of losing everything. That woman seemed like a stranger to me now. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger, more certain, more willing to face hard truths and make difficult choices. When I emerged from my bedroom, Claire was waiting for me, her eyes full of concern. "Are you sure about this, Mom? Once you do this, there's no going back." I took her hands in mine. "I'm sure. For the first time in a very long time, I'm absolutely sure about what I need to do." At the Blackwood building, a podium had been set up in the lobby, flanked by the company logo. Cameras and reporters were already gathering, drawn by the mysterious summons from a company suddenly at the center of a brewing scandal. Michael met us at the private entrance, his face somber but resolved. "Harris is here. And his lawyer. They're both on board." "And the other officials?" I asked. "The ones named in Richard's records?" "Most of them. A few are still holding out, hoping this will all blow over." I nodded, unsurprised. "They'll come around when they see we're serious." Thomas approached, legal pad in hand. "Everything's ready, Eleanor. Are you?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what was to come, but also feeling, for the first time in years, truly alive. Truly myself. "I'm ready," I said. As I stepped up to the podium, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, I caught sight of a familiar figure at the back of the crowd. Vivian, her face a mask of confusion and suspicion. She had expected to be controlling the narrative today, to be the center of attention as she destroyed the Blackwood name. Instead, she was about to witness something she hadn't anticipated. The truth, but not her version of it. "Good afternoon," I began, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "My name is Eleanor Blackwood. Until 3 weeks ago, I was simply the wife of Richard Blackwood, the widow mourning her husband. Today, I stand before you as the head of Blackwood Development, and I have something important to share with this community, a community my husband helped build, for better and for worse." The reporters leaned forward, sensing that this was no ordinary corporate statement. Recently, allegations have been made about corruption within Blackwood Development, specifically regarding the Riverside project. I am here today to tell you that these allegations are true. A murmur ran through the crowd. At the back, I saw Vivian's eyes widen in shock. My husband, Richard Blackwood, did pay bribes to city officials to expedite approvals. Environmental reports were falsified. Safety regulations were circumvented, all in the name of profit and progress. The murmur grew louder. Cameras clicked rapidly. I could see Michael and Claire standing to the side, their faces solemn but supportive. I did not know of these activities while they were happening. But ignorance is not an excuse. As Richard's wife, as a beneficiary of the wealth these projects generated, I bear a responsibility. And now, as the head of Blackwood Development, I have a duty to make things right. I gestured, and Thomas handed me a folder. Today, I am announcing the establishment of the Riverside Remediation Trust, a fund of $50 million dedicated to thoroughly addressing the environmental issues at the Riverside development. Work has already begun, and will continue until every concern has been fully resolved. The reporters were scribbling frantically now, some already raising hands with questions. Additionally, Blackwood Development will be implementing a new corporate governance structure with complete transparency in all dealings with government entities. We will be cooperating fully with any investigations into past misconduct, and I personally pledge that such behavior will never again be part of how this company operates. I paused, then continued with the most difficult part. To those officials who accepted bribes from my husband, I say this: come forward now. Join me in making amends. Join me in showing this community that integrity can be reclaimed, that past mistakes can be acknowledged and corrected. And then, to my surprise and the visible shock of everyone present, Councilman Harris stepped forward to stand beside me at the podium. "My name is James Harris," he said, his voice wavering slightly, "and I accepted bribes from Richard Blackwood to fast-track the Riverside development. I betrayed the trust of the people who elected me, and I am prepared to face the consequences of my actions." The press room erupted in chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing continuously. Through it all, I kept my eyes on Vivian, watching as her expression shifted from shock to fury to something close to panic. This was not how her revenge was supposed to play out. She had wanted to destroy me, to be the avenging whistleblower. Instead, I had taken that power from her by confessing first. "I will now take questions," I said, turning my attention back to the reporters. "But before I do, there is one more thing I want to make clear. While I accept responsibility for addressing the wrongs of the past, I was not the only one who knew what was happening at Riverside. There were others who facilitated these bribes, who arranged meetings between my husband and officials, who helped falsify documents." Now the room fell silent, every eye on me. One such person was Vivian Cross, who has recently positioned herself as a whistleblower. Ms. Cross was, in fact, deeply involved in the corruption she now claims to expose. She was not just my husband's mistress, but his accomplice. At the back of the room, Vivian's face went pale. I saw her turn to leave, but 2 men in suits, investigators from the district attorney's office, arranged by Thomas, were already approaching her. I have provided the district attorney with evidence of Ms. Cross's involvement, including my husband's detailed records of transactions. I continued, my voice carrying over the renewed murmurs. I believe in accountability for everyone involved, regardless of their relationship to my family. As Vivian was escorted from the room, her face contorted with rage and fear, I felt no triumph, no sense of victory, only a deep, quiet certainty that I was, at last, doing the right thing. The questions came in a torrent after that, about the extent of the corruption, about potential criminal charges, about the future of Blackwood development. I answered as honestly as I could, neither minimizing the wrongs that had been done nor dramatizing my own role in exposing them. When it was over, when the last reporter had been answered and the cameras had stopped rolling, Michael approached me, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "That was impressive," he said. "But you know this isn't over. The DA will still want to investigate. There could still be charges." "I know," I said calmly. "But we've taken the first step. The most important step." Claire joined us, slipping her arm through mine. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I don't think I've ever been more proud." I squeezed her hand, grateful for her support, for both my children's support. "We're going to get through this. Together. And when we do, Blackwood development will be something we can all be proud of." As we walked toward the exit, Thomas fell into step beside us. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I worked with Richard for over 30 years. I thought I knew him, but I never saw this coming. Any of it. The affair, the corruption, the changes to his will. People can surprise you," I said. "Sometimes even themselves." Thomas smiled slightly. "You certainly surprised Vivian Cross today. And me, if I'm being honest. I thought about the woman I had been just weeks ago and the woman I was becoming now. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us who we really are," I said. "What we're really capable of." The following weeks were a storm I never could have prepared for. My confession at the press conference made national news, with headlines screaming about the Blackwood scandal and corruption in Meridian Heights. Reporters camped outside my home, hoping to catch a glimpse of the whistleblower widow, as one particularly creative journalist had dubbed me. But the most vicious coverage came from Vivian herself. After being questioned by the district attorney's office and released pending further investigation, she went on a media offensive. She appeared on every local news show that would have her, portraying herself as the victim of a vindictive older woman who couldn't accept that her husband had found love elsewhere. "Eleanor Blackwood is trying to destroy me because she can't face the truth," she told one particularly sympathetic interviewer. "Richard and I were in love. We were planning a future together. And now she's using her money and influence to frame me for his crimes." Each time I saw her on television, spinning her web of lies with those wide, innocent eyes, I felt a fresh surge of anger. But I had promised myself I wouldn't sink to her level. I wouldn't make this personal, even though it felt deeply, painfully personal. Instead, I focused on what needed to be done. Thomas and his team of lawyers worked tirelessly to negotiate with the district attorney, offering full cooperation in exchange for leniency. Michael threw himself into restructuring Blackwood development, implementing new compliance procedures, reassuring nervous investors and employees. Claire, with her background in public relations, managed the company's communication strategy, emphasizing transparency and accountability. And I did what I had always done best. I faced the public. I attended community meetings in Riverside, listening to residents' concerns, promising action rather than just words. I met with environmental experts, with health officials, with city planners, all to ensure that the remediation efforts were as thorough as they needed to be. It was exhausting, often thankless work. But for the first time in decades, I felt I was doing something meaningful, something that mattered beyond maintaining appearances or hosting the perfect dinner party. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the press conference, Thomas called with news that changed everything. "Eleanor," he said, his voice unusually somber, "the DA wants to talk to you. In person. As soon as possible." My heart sank. Despite our cooperation, we had always known criminal charges were a possibility. "Are they filing charges?" "They wouldn't say. But they specifically asked for you, not Michael or any of the other executives." I glanced at the calendar on my desk. "I'll clear my schedule. Set it up for tomorrow." "Eleanor," Thomas hesitated, "you should prepare yourself. This could be serious." After hanging up, I sat for a long moment, staring out at the rain lashing against my office window. I had known from the beginning that there would be consequences for what Richard had done, for what we had all done, through action or inaction. I had been prepared to face those consequences. But now, faced with the reality of potential criminal charges, I felt a flicker of fear. Not for myself. I had made my peace with whatever was coming, but for my children, for the employees of Blackwood Development who depended on the company for their livelihoods, for the residents of Riverside who needed the remediation work to continue. That evening, I invited Michael and Claire to dinner at the house. I wanted to tell them about the meeting with the DA in person, to prepare them for what might be coming. Criminal charges? Michael repeated, his face pale, when I broke the news. Mom, you need to let me come with you. Or, at least let our lawyers handle it. I shook my head. The DA asked to see me specifically, and I think I need to do this alone. But you didn't do anything wrong, Claire protested. You didn't know about any of it, didn't I? I asked quietly. There were signs, Claire. For years, there were signs that something wasn't right. I chose not to see them because it was easier that way. Because I didn't want to disrupt the life I had built. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it made my heart ache. So, what? You're just going to martyr yourself? Take the fall for all of us. I'm going to tell the truth, I said firmly. Whatever happens after that, we'll face it together. The district attorney's office was housed in a stern, imposing building downtown. As I walked up the steps the next morning, I felt as if I were moving in slow motion, each step taking me closer to a reckoning I had both dreaded and, in some strange way, welcomed. District Attorney Sarah Chun was younger than I had expected, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She greeted me with a firm handshake, then gestured for me to take a seat across from her desk. Mrs. Blackwood, she began, thank you for coming in today. I appreciate your willingness to meet without counsel present. I have nothing to hide, Miss Chun, I said, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. I'm here to cooperate in any way I can. She nodded, studying me with those penetrating eyes. Your cooperation so far has been noted. The information you've provided has been enlightening, to say the least. I waited, my heart pounding, for her to continue. We've been investigating the Riverside development for some time, she said, picking up a thick folder from her desk. Long before Ms. Cross came forward with her allegations. In fact, we had already identified several of the officials involved and were building a case. This surprised me. You knew? Before all this came out. She smiled slightly. It's my job to know, Mrs. Blackwood. Just as it was your husband's job to try to hide it. What we didn't have, until recently, was concrete evidence linking the bribes to specific individuals within Blackwood Development. And now you do, I said, understanding where this was going. Because of what I gave you. Richard's notebook. Among other things, she agreed. The question now is what to do with that evidence. I straightened in my chair. I'm prepared to accept whatever charges you feel are appropriate. D.A. Chin leaned back, regarding me thoughtfully. That's very noble. But here's my dilemma, Mrs. Blackwood. The evidence suggests that while your husband was deeply involved in this corruption scheme, you were not. At least, not directly. I benefited from it, I pointed out. I lived in the house those bribes paid for. I wore the clothes, attended the parties, enjoyed the lifestyle.
True.
But under the law, that's not the same as actively participating in bribery or fraud. I frowned, confused by the direction of the conversation. I'm not sure I understand, Miss Chun. If you're not planning to charge me, why am I here? She leaned forward, her expression intent. Because I need something from you, Mrs. Blackwood. Something only you can provide. And what is that? Vivian Cross. The name hung in the air between us. What about her? I asked carefully. Ms. Cross has been elusive in our interviews. She admits to a relationship with your husband but denies any knowledge of or involvement in his business dealings. She claims the evidence you provided, the notebook, the emails, has been doctored to implicate her. That's ridiculous, I said, anger flaring. Why would I do that? According to Ms. Cross, out of jealousy and a desire for revenge. She's painting herself as the victim of a vindictive widow. I laughed bitterly. And you believe her? What I believe doesn't matter, D.A. Chin said evenly. What matters is what I can prove in court. And right now, without additional evidence, it's her word against yours. I considered this. So, what do you need from me? We know Ms. Cross had conversations with you about Riverside. About the bribes. Conversations where she essentially admitted her role. She paused meaningfully. If you were to testify to those conversations. Understanding dawned. You want me to be your star witness against Vivian? Yes. I sat back, trying to process this unexpected turn. Instead of being the defendant, I was being asked to be the prosecution's key witness. What about the other charges? The officials who took bribes? The company itself? D.A. Chen's expression was carefully neutral. We're pursuing those cases separately. Several officials have already agreed to plead guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. As for Blackwood Development, that's still being determined. Your cooperation in the case against Ms. Cross would certainly be taken into consideration. In other words, if I help them nail Vivian, they might go easier on the company. On Michael. On everyone else involved. I'll need to consult with my lawyers, I said. Of course, D.A. Chin agreed. But I should warn you, Mrs. Blackwood. Ms. Cross is not taking this lying down. She's been making some troubling allegations. What kind of allegations? The DA hesitated. She's claiming that you knew about the environmental issues at Riverside all along. That you personally persuaded her not to report them because of the potential impact on property values in the area where you had other investments. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. That's absolutely false. I thought it might be, she said. But Ms. Cross is very convincing. And she has supporters, people who find her story of being manipulated by a powerful family compelling. She's trying to destroy me, I said quietly. To take everything from me, just like she tried to do after Richard died. D.A. Chin gathered her papers, signaling that our meeting was coming to an end. Think about my offer, Mrs. Blackwood. Your testimony could make all the difference in this case. As I walked out of the imposing building, my mind was spinning. I had come prepared to face charges, perhaps even arrest. Instead, I had been offered a deal that could potentially protect my family, the company, everything I had fought to preserve. All I had to do was help put Vivian Cross in prison. The irony wasn't lost on me. Weeks ago, at Richard's funeral, I had stood helpless as Vivian whispered her cruel threats in my ear. Now I held her fate in my hands. It should have felt like justice, like vindication. Instead, it felt complicated, messy. Because while Vivian deserved to face consequences for her actions, so did many others, including perhaps me. I called Thomas from the car, giving him a brief outline of the meeting. He was cautiously optimistic. This could be the best possible outcome, Eleanor, he said. If the DA is focusing on Vivian, it suggests they're looking for a scapegoat. Someone to take the fall for the whole scheme. That doesn't seem right, I objected. Vivian was involved, yes, but she wasn't the mastermind. Richard was. And the officials who took the bribes. And the executives who helped implement the plans. Thomas was silent for a moment. You're not actually defending Vivian Cross, are you? After everything she's done? Was I? The thought was so absurd, I almost laughed.
No.
I don't know. It feels too neat, too convenient. Sometimes we get lucky, Eleanor. Take the win. But as I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the DA's offer wasn't quite right. Why focus so intently on Vivian? Yes, she had been involved, but she was far from the biggest player in the scheme. Unless there was something I was missing. Something about Vivian's role that made her particularly valuable to the prosecution. When I arrived home, I went straight to Richard's study, to the safe where I kept his notebook and the other evidence I had gathered. I needed to go through it all again, more carefully this time, looking for patterns I might have missed. Hours later, I sat back, rubbing my tired eyes. The picture that had emerged was disturbing. Vivian's role had been more significant than I had initially realized. She hadn't just been a go-between. In many cases, She had been the one to suggest the bribes in the first place, to identify which officials might be susceptible, to determine the amounts. And there was something else. In the months before Richard's death, there had been a shift. The entries in his notebook showed larger sums, more frequent payments. But they weren't all going to city officials anymore. Some were going directly to Vivian. Large amounts, labeled simply V, insurance. Insurance against what? I was still pondering this when there was a knock at the study door. Claire peeked in, her face concerned.
Mom?
You've been in here for hours. Is everything okay? I gestured for her to come in, showing her what I had found. Do you have any idea what this might mean? Why your father would be paying Vivian so much money in those final months? Claire studied the notebook, her brow furrowed. Insurance. Maybe he was literally buying her an insurance policy? Or setting up some kind of trust for her? No, that wouldn't be in this notebook. This was where he recorded the bribes, the payoffs. Things he wanted to keep track of, but not through official channels. Claire's eyes widened as a thought struck her. What if it was blackmail? What if she was threatening him with something? Something he was willing to pay to keep quiet. The idea sent a chill through me. What could Vivian have had on Richard that would make him pay such large sums? What secret could have been worse than the corruption we already knew about? We need to find out, I said, rising from the desk. Before I agree to anything with the DA, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with.
How?
It's not like we can just ask Vivian. I thought for a moment. No, but there might be someone else who knows. Someone who was close to Richard in those final months. Richard's executive assistant, Margaret Winters, had worked for him for over 20 years. She had been fiercely loyal, managing his schedule, handling his correspondence, probably knowing more about his daily movements than I did. If anyone might have insights into his relationship with Vivian, it would be her. I had avoided contacting her after Richard's death, partly out of a reluctance to face someone who might have enabled his affair, partly because I wasn't sure I wanted to know what she knew. But now I needed answers. Margaret agreed to meet me for coffee the next morning. When I arrived at the small cafe we had chosen, she was already there, looking nervous but composed. She had always been an efficient, no-nonsense woman, with a practical short haircut and sensible clothes. Today was no exception. "Mrs. Blackwood," she greeted me, rising slightly as I took the seat across from her. "Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for meeting me, Margaret. And please call me Eleanor." She nodded, though I could tell she was uncomfortable with the familiarity. In all the years she had worked for Richard, we had maintained a polite but distant relationship. I had been Mrs. Blackwood to her, and she had been Margaret to me, and neither of us had tried to bridge that gap. "I assume this is about the situation with the company," she said carefully. "The investigations." "Partly," I admitted. "But more specifically, it's about Vivian Cross." Margaret's expression didn't change, but I saw her hands tighten around her coffee cup. "I see. You knew about her, didn't you? About her relationship with Richard." She met my gaze steadily.
Yes.
I knew. I had expected denial, or at least embarrassment. Her straightforward admission caught me off guard. "For how long?" "From the beginning. About 8 years ago." She hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear. What I want is the truth, Margaret, even if it's difficult." She seemed to consider this, weighing her words. "Mr. Blackwood asked me to help arrange his meetings with Miss Cross, to block out time in his schedule, to make hotel reservations sometimes." She looked down at her coffee. I didn't approve, but it wasn't my place to judge. "And the business relationship? Did you know about that too? About her role in the bribes?" Now Margaret looked truly uncomfortable. I suspected something wasn't right. There were meetings that weren't recorded in the official calendar. Phone calls he would take in private. Documents I was asked to shred. "But you never questioned it." She bristled slightly. "Mrs. Blackwood, Eleanor, I was an employee. I did my job. If I had raised concerns, I would have been fired. And at my age, with my qualifications." She trailed off, but I understood. She had been trapped in her own way, dependent on Richard for her livelihood. "I'm not judging you, Margaret," I assured her. I'm just trying to understand what was happening, especially in those last few months before Richard died. Her expression shifted, a flicker of something. Fear? Concern? Crossing her face. What do you mean? I pulled out a copy of the relevant pages from Richard's notebook, showing her the entries labeled V insurance. These payments to Vivian. Do you know what they were for? What kind of insurance he was buying from her? Margaret stared at the pages for a long moment, her face going pale. Then, to my surprise, she gathered her purse and stood abruptly. I should go. Margaret, please, I said, rising as well. If you know something. I don't, she said firmly. And even if I did, I wouldn't betray Mr. Blackwood's confidence. Not even now. Richard is dead, I reminded her gently. And whatever secrets you're keeping for him, they could hurt a lot of people, including you. She hesitated, conflict evident in her face. I signed a non-disclosure agreement when I started working for Blackwood Development. I could be sued. Not by me, I said. I promise you that. Whatever you tell me stays between us. I just need to know what I'm dealing with before I make decisions that affect my family, the company, everyone involved. Margaret glanced around the cafe nervously, then slowly sat back down. I don't know everything, she said in a low voice. But I know Ms. Cross was pressuring Mr. Blackwood in those final months. Threatening him. With what? She looked down at her hands. There were other developments. Before Riverside. Projects where corners were cut. Where the environmental impact was worse. My blood ran cold. Worse than Riverside?
How?
I don't know the details, but I overheard arguments. Ms. Cross talking about the others who got sick. About evidence that wouldn't stay buried. Margaret looked up at me, her eyes troubled. I think there were health issues. Serious ones. At one of the earlier developments. Which one? Lakeside Estates, I think. It was one of his first major projects about 15 years ago. Lakeside Estates. An upscale residential community built around a man-made lake. I remembered the grand opening, the publicity, Richard's pride in creating what he called a waterfront lifestyle for the discriminating homeowner. And Vivian had evidence of what? That the development caused health problems. Margaret nodded reluctantly. That's what it sounded like. She kept talking about the files and how they proved everything. Mr. Blackwood seemed afraid. I'd never seen him like that before. I thought of the large payments in the notebook. Richard buying Vivian's silence, not just about their affair or the bribes, but about something much worse. Something that could have destroyed him completely if it had come out. Why didn't she use this information when he changed his will? I wondered aloud. Why threaten me with the Riverside evidence when she had something much more damaging? Margaret shrugged. Maybe she didn't think she needed to. Maybe she was saving it as a last resort. Or maybe I thought she was planning to use it against me all along. The Riverside allegations were just the opening salvo in a war she intended to escalate until she got what she wanted. Richard's money, his legacy, everything he had built. Thank you, Margaret, I said sincerely. I know this wasn't easy for you. She gathered her purse again, looking relieved that our conversation was ending. What are you going to do now? It was a good question. One I wasn't sure I had an answer to yet. I'm going to find out the truth about Lakeside Estates. And then I'm going to decide how to handle Vivian Cross once and for all. As Margaret walked away, I remained at the table, my coffee forgotten as my mind raced with the implications of what I had just learned. If there had been serious health issues at Lakeside Estates, issues that Richard and others had covered up, it was potentially far worse than the Riverside situation. People could have been harmed. Lives could have been lost. And now Vivian had the evidence. Evidence she might use at any moment, not just against me, but against anyone associated with Blackwood Development, including my children. I left the cafe with a new sense of urgency. I needed to find out exactly what had happened at Lakeside Estates, and I needed to do it before Vivian made her next move. Back at home, I went straight to Richard's study again, this time looking for any files related to the Lakeside project. But I found nothing, no contracts, no reports, nothing that would shed light on potential environmental issues. which meant Richard had deliberately removed that information from his home office. Had destroyed it, perhaps, or hidden it somewhere else. I was still searching when Michael arrived, having received my urgent text asking him to come over. "Mom? What's going on?" he asked, finding me surrounded by stacks of files. I explained what Margaret had told me, watching his face carefully for any sign that he already knew about the Lakeside situation. "Lakeside Estates?" he repeated, looking genuinely surprised. "But that was before my time with the company. I was still in college when Dad built that." "So, you never heard anything about health issues there? About contamination?" He shook his head.
No, never.
"It's always been one of our most prestigious developments. The houses there still sell for a premium." I believed him. Michael might have been complicit in the Riverside corruption, but he had been young then, following his father's lead. If there had been problems at Lakeside years earlier, Richard would likely have kept them hidden even from his son. "We need to find out what happened," I said. "If Vivian has evidence of a cover-up, something that hurt people, we need to know before she uses it." Michael paced the room, running a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture.
How?
The project files would be at the company headquarters, but anything sensitive would have been purged years ago. Then we need to look elsewhere. Health department records, insurance claims, news reports from that time. I stood up, my mind made up. And we need to talk to the people who lived there when it was first built. Someone must know something. Michael looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Mom, this is a lot. If we start digging into Lakeside, we might uncover things that could make the Riverside situation look minor in comparison. Are you sure you want to do this?" I thought of Vivian's smug face at Richard's funeral, of her cruel whisper in my ear, of her threats and manipulations in the weeks since, of how she had tried to take everything from me, my dignity, my home, my family's legacy. But I also thought of the families living at Lakeside Estates, of children who might have been exposed to toxins, of health problems that might have been dismissed or covered up, of Richard's role in all of it, and by extension, my own unwitting complicity. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "Whatever happened at Lakeside, whatever Richard did or didn't do, it's part of our family's legacy now. And I need to face it. We all do." Michael nodded slowly. "Okay, then we do this together. I'll get Claire on board too. Between the three of us, we should be able to find something." We spent the rest of the day dividing up tasks. Michael would search the company archives for any remaining documentation on Lakeside. Claire would use her PR contacts to discreetly research any news stories or public records about the development. And I would focus on finding and talking to original residents of the community. It was painstaking work, made more difficult by the passage of time and the apparent thoroughness with which Richard had erased any evidence of problems. But by the end of the week, we had begun to piece together a disturbing picture. Lakeside Estates had been built on the site of a former chemical plant that had operated from the 1950s through the late 1980s. The plant had manufactured pesticides and other agricultural chemicals, some of which had later been banned due to their toxicity. When Richard acquired the land in the early 2000s, environmental testing had been done, but according to a former employee Claire managed to track down, the results had been alarming. High levels of several carcinogenic compounds had been found in the soil and groundwater. Rather than undertake the expensive cleanup that would have been required, Richard had allegedly falsified the environmental reports, presenting a sanitized version to regulators. Construction had proceeded, with the contaminated soil being used to create the very hills and landscaped areas that made Lakeside Estates so attractive to buyers. And then, a few years after people moved in, the health problems had started. Unusual clusters of cancers, respiratory issues, neurological symptoms in children. We found medical records, insurance claims, even a small, quickly suppressed attempt by residents to investigate a potential connection between their health problems and their homes. But each time, Blackwood Development, meaning Richard, had stepped in with settlements, confidentiality agreements, and when necessary, pressure on local officials to look the other way. It was a pattern that made the Riverside situation seem almost benign in comparison. There, the contamination had been contained, the worst areas avoided for residential use. At Lakeside, people had been living directly on toxic land for years. How many people were affected? I asked Michael when we gathered to share our findings. He looked grim. It's hard to say exactly. The settlement agreements we found covered about 30 families. But there could have been more that we don't know about. And these families, Claire added, they can't talk about it. They signed NDAs as part of their settlements. They got money, medical coverage, and in exchange, they promised never to discuss what happened. I felt sick. So Richard bought their silence. Just like he tried to buy Vivian's. But someone talked to Vivian, Michael pointed out. Someone gave her evidence that all this happened. Or she found it herself, Claire suggested. If she had access to Dad's private files through her role as his, whatever she was. I thought about this. Either way, she has information that could destroy what's left of Blackwood development. That could potentially lead to criminal charges far more serious than what we're facing with Riverside. So, what do we do?
Claire asked.
Pay her off after all? I shook my head firmly.
No.
We don't negotiate with blackmailers. And paying her wouldn't solve the underlying problem anyway. These families at Lakeside, they deserved better than to be silenced with money. They deserved justice. Michael looked alarmed. Mom, you're not thinking of going public with this, are you? It would be the end of everything. The company, our reputation, possibly our freedom if there were criminal investigations. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I do know we can't just ignore it now that we know. We have a responsibility to make it right, somehow. And Vivian? Claire asked. What about her? She could release what she knows at any moment. That was the question that had been weighing on me all week. What to do about Vivian Cross, the woman who held the power to destroy everything I had left. I need to talk to her, I said finally, face to face. One last time. Michael and Claire both protested immediately, arguing that meeting with Vivian was too risky, that she couldn't be trusted, that she might record the conversation or twist my words. I know the risks, I assured them, but I need to look her in the eye, to understand what she really wants, and to make her an offer she won't be expecting. After more discussion, they reluctantly agreed, but only if the meeting took place in a public location, with both of them nearby in case something went wrong. I called Vivian that evening, half expecting her to refuse to speak to me. But she answered on the second ring, her voice cool and controlled. Eleanor. What an unexpected pleasure. I think we need to talk, I said, getting straight to the point, about Lakeside Estates. There was a moment of silence, and I could almost feel her calculating, reassessing the situation. Well, she said finally. You've been doing your homework.
Yes.
And I think it's time we reached an understanding. Are you willing to meet? Why not, she said, a new confidence in her voice. Tomorrow. The Lakeside Country Club. Let's say noon. I'll be there. As I hung up, I felt a strange calm descend over me. The weeks of fear, of uncertainty, of being manipulated and threatened, they were coming to an end. Tomorrow, one way or another, I would settle things with Vivian Cross. The Lakeside Country Club was, ironically, one of the crown jewels of the Lakeside Estates development. A sprawling, elegant building overlooking the man-made lake, it had been designed to evoke the grand resorts of an earlier era. Richard had been so proud of it, had spent so much time ensuring every detail was perfect. Now, knowing what I did about the land it was built on, it seemed like a monument to hubris and deception. Vivian was waiting for me on the terrace, seated at a table with a view of the water. She wore large sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, as if trying to avoid being recognized. Given the media attention surrounding her allegations, I couldn't blame her for the attempt at discretion. Eleanor, she greeted me as I took the seat across from her. You're looking determined. I am, I agreed. Determined to end this once and for all. She smiled, a predatory curve of her red lips. End it? Oh, I don't think so. We're just getting started. I know about Lakeside, I said, not bothering with preliminaries. About the contamination. About the health problems. About the cover-up. Yes, I gathered that from your call. She sipped her wine, studying me over the rim of her glass. The question is, what do you plan to do about it? That depends on you, Vivian. She raised an eyebrow. On me? How intriguing. You have evidence of what happened here. Documents, probably. Records that Richard kept and that you somehow accessed. Evidence that could destroy what's left of Blackwood development and potentially lead to criminal charges against many people, including my son. She didn't deny it. And I want to know what it would take for you to turn over that evidence to me. All of it. Vivian laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Now who's attempting blackmail? Let me guess. You'll drop your cooperation with the DA's case against me if I give you the Lakeside files. No, I said calmly. I'm not offering to protect you from the consequences of your actions with Riverside. You participated in corruption, and you should face the appropriate legal penalties for that. Just as we all should. She frowned, clearly confused by my approach. Then what are you offering? $10 million. Vivian's eyes widened behind her sunglasses. The same amount I asked for after Richard died. The amount you refused to pay.
Yes.
But with one crucial difference. Which is, I leaned forward, making sure she understood exactly what I was proposing. The money won't be paid to you. It will go into a fund for the families affected by the Lakeside contamination. For medical expenses, for relocation if they want it, for whatever they need to recover from what was done to them. Vivian stared at me, genuinely taken aback. You're not trying to buy my silence. You're trying to buy my evidence so you can what? Expose the whole thing yourself? Yes. She shook her head, as if trying to make sense of my strategy.
Why?
Why would you do that? It will destroy everything. The company, your family's name, everything Richard built. Because it's the right thing to do, I said simply. Because those families deserve justice. Because the truth, no matter how painful, is better than living with lies. For a moment, Vivian's carefully maintained facade seemed to crack. I glimpsed something unexpected in her face, not just surprise, but something almost like respect. You're serious, she said, not quite a question. Completely. She removed her sunglasses, studying me with new intensity. You know, I never understood what Richard saw in you. I thought you were just convenient, respectable, safe. I never imagined you had this kind of steel. There's a lot about me Richard never saw, I said, or chose not to see. Vivian was silent for a long moment, her fingers tapping thoughtfully against her wine glass. And if I refuse your offer? If I take what I know to the highest bidder, a tabloid, perhaps, or one of Richard's business rivals? Then you'll get your money. Maybe more than what I'm offering. But you'll also have to live with knowing that you had a chance to help those families and chose not to. That you put your own greed above their need for justice. She laughed, but it sounded forced. You think that would bother me? That I have some sort of conscience lurking beneath the surface? I think everyone has a conscience, Vivian. Even you. The question is whether you choose to listen to it. Vivian stared at me, her perfectly made-up face a mask I couldn't read. Then she laughed, a sound so bitter it seemed to poison the air between us. A conscience? Is that what you think this is about? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Let me tell you something about conscience, Eleanor. My sister lived in Lakeside Estates, one of the first families to move in. Beautiful house, perfect view of the water. She was so proud of it, her piece of the American dream. I felt the blood drain from my face. Your sister? Catherine Cross. She moved here from Chicago because I told her what a wonderful place Meridian Heights was. How safe. How clean. Vivian's voice cracked slightly. She had 2 children. Beautiful little girls. Emma was 6. Lily was 4. The past tense sent a chill through me. What happened to them? Emma started getting headaches first. Terrible, blinding headaches that would leave her screaming in pain. The doctors thought it was migraines. Then seizures. Then they found the tumor. Vivian's eyes glittered with unshed tears. Brain cancer in a 6-year-old child. Do you have any idea what that's like to watch? To see a little girl who should be learning to ride a bike instead learning to live with pain no child should ever have to endure. I couldn't speak. Couldn't find words adequate for the horror of what she was describing. She died 14 months after diagnosis. By then, Lily was already showing symptoms. And my sister, she started connecting the dots, asking questions, finding other families in the neighborhood with similar stories. And that's when she encountered Richard, I guessed, when Blackwood Development started offering settlements. Vivian nodded, her face hard with remembered rage. Richard swooped in with his lawyers, his NDAs, his blood money. My sister was a single mother, drowning in medical bills. She took the settlement because she had no choice. Because Lily needed specialized care that insurance wouldn't cover. And Lily? I barely dared to ask. She died 3 years later, 9 years old. Vivian's voice was flat now, drained of emotion. My sister followed 6 months after that. An overdose. The official ruling was accidental, but we both know what it really was. I closed my eyes, the weight of this revelation pressing down on me like a physical thing. I'm so sorry, Vivian. I had no idea. Of course you didn't. You were too busy hosting charity galas and decorating your mansion to notice the families your husband was destroying. The accusation stung, partly because there was truth in it. I had been oblivious, willfully or not, to the darker side of Richard's business dealings. Is that why you became involved with Richard? To get justice for your sister and her children? Something flickered in Vivian's eyes. Shame, perhaps, or regret. At first, I got a job with the city planning office specifically to get close to Blackwood Development, to find evidence of what they'd done at Lakeside. But then what? She laughed again, that same bitter sound. Then I met Richard. Charming, confident, so certain of his own invincibility. And I thought, why settle for evidence? Why not take everything? His money, his company, his life. Everything he valued. So it wasn't just about the bribes or the business. I said, understanding dawning. It was personal from the beginning. Very personal. Vivian's expression hardened. I wanted him to fall in love with me.
To leave you for me.
To give me everything voluntarily, and then, when he was completely in my power, I wanted to reveal who I really was. To watch him realize that the woman he'd thrown everything away for was the sister of one of his victims. But it didn't work out that way. She shook her head. Richard was more complicated than I expected. He did fall for me in his way. But he wouldn't leave you. Kept making excuses, putting it off. And then when he got sick, he saw through you. I finished for her. He realized you had an agenda beyond being his mistress. He found out who my sister was, Vivian admitted. I don't know how, but suddenly he was suspicious, asking questions, looking into my background. That's when the insurance payment started. He was buying my silence, not just about the bribes, but about Lakeside, about my connection to it. I thought about the Richard the First had known or thought I had known. The man who could be charming and generous one moment, calculating and ruthless the next. Who had built a business empire through vision but also through corruption. Who had cheated on me for years but had, in the end, left everything to me rather than to his mistress. And when he changed his will, I said slowly, when he left you nothing, you decided to take your revenge another way.
Through me.
Through the company. You were collateral damage, Vivian said with a shrug that didn't quite hide the tension in her shoulders. I never hated you, Eleanor. I just didn't care about you one way or the other. You were an obstacle. Richard was my target. But Richard is dead, I pointed out. Whatever satisfaction you might have gotten from destroying him, that opportunity is gone. All you can do now is hurt people who had nothing to do with what happened to your sister. People like my children. Like the employees of Blackwood Development. Like me. Vivian was silent for a long moment, staring out at the lake. The beautiful, poisoned lake that had been part of her sister's dream home. Maybe that's enough, she said finally. Maybe knowing I've taken everything from his family, just like he took everything from mine, maybe that's justice. Is it? I asked quietly. Will it bring Emma and Lily back? Will it give your sister peace? Or will it just create more pain, more victims? She turned back to me, her eyes hard. Are you seriously trying to appeal to my better nature? After everything I've told you, I'm trying to offer you a choice, I said. A better choice than revenge. Justice for the families of Lakeside. Real justice, not just money or retribution. And what about justice for me? Vivian demanded. For what Richard did to my family.
For what he did to me.
I considered this carefully. The district attorney has offered me a deal. My testimony against you in exchange for leniency for the company. For my family. Her eyes narrowed. And you're going to take it? No, I said. I'm not. She blinked, clearly surprised. You're not. I'm going to tell the DA the truth. The whole truth. About Richard, about the company, about Riverside. And about you. I paused, holding her gaze. Including what you've just told me about your sister. Why would you do that? It doesn't help your case. Because it's the truth, I said simply. And because I'm done with lies and cover-ups and pretending things didn't happen when they did. Whatever the consequences are for me, for my family, for the company, we'll face them. Vivian studied me with new intensity, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. You're serious about this? About the fund for the Lakeside families? About going public with everything? Yes. Even knowing it could mean criminal charges? Civil lawsuits that could bankrupt you? The complete destruction of your husband's legacy. Richard's legacy, I said firmly, is not something I'm interested in preserving anymore. Not if it was built on the suffering of children like Emma and Lily. What matters now is making whatever amends we can to the people who were harmed. Vivian sat back, something like respect flickering across her face. You've changed, Eleanor. The woman I met at Richard's funeral would never have said those words. The woman you met at Richard's funeral didn't know what I know now, I replied. Didn't understand what I understand now. We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the country club, quiet conversations, the clink of glasses, soft music, continuing around us as if nothing momentous was happening. As if two women weren't sitting there making decisions that would affect dozens, perhaps hundreds of lives. 10 million, Vivian said finally, for the Lakeside families. And in exchange, I give you everything I have on the cover-up. Yes. And what about me? My role in the Riverside bribes? The DA's case. I met her gaze steadily. I won't lie for you, Vivian. If asked, I'll testify to what I know. But I'll also tell them about your sister. About why you did what you did. The rest will be up to the courts. She considered this, her red-tipped fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. And if I refuse? If I decide to take my evidence to the media instead? Then you'll still get your revenge, I acknowledged. But you'll miss the chance to actually help the families like your sisters. To get them the medical care, the support, the acknowledgement they deserve. Vivian took a long sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving mine. When she set the glass down, her decision seemed made. I want oversight, she said, of the fund. I want to be involved in how the money is distributed, who qualifies, what support they receive. It wasn't what I had expected, but I could understand it. This wasn't just business for her. It was deeply personal. That can be arranged, as long as there's a proper structure, with legal and medical advisors as well. And I want public acknowledgement. From Blackwood Development. Admitting what happened at Lakeside. No more cover-ups, no more confidentiality agreements. Yes, I agreed. Complete transparency. She nodded slowly. Then we have a deal. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, not all of it, not even most of it, but enough to allow me to breathe more freely than I had in weeks. I'll have Thomas draw up the paperwork. For the fund, for the transfer of the evidence, all of it. Always so proper, Eleanor, Vivian said, but the mockery in her voice had been replaced by something closer to grudging respect. Always so concerned with doing things the right way. Not always, I admitted. But I'm trying to start now. As we both rose to leave, Vivian paused, looking out at the lake one more time. You know, I used to fantasize about burning it all down. The company, the developments, everything Richard built. She turned back to me, her expression unreadable behind her sunglasses. But maybe this is better. Using his money to help the people he hurt. There's a poetry to it, don't you think? Yes, I said.
Idag.
I watched her walk away. This woman who had been my nemesis, my husband's mistress, a threat to everything I had. Now she was… what? Not a friend, certainly. Not even an ally in the conventional sense. But someone with whom I now shared a purpose, however unexpected. As I turned to leave, I spotted Michael and Claire waiting discreetly at the bar, their faces anxious. I waved to let them know everything was all right, or as all right as it could be under the circumstances. "Mom," Claire said as I approached. "What happened? We saw you talking to Vivian, but we couldn't hear anything." "We reached an agreement," I said simply. "I'll explain everything back at the house." Michael looked skeptical. "An agreement? With Vivian Cross? Can we trust her?" I thought about Vivian's story, about her sister and her nieces, about the grief and rage that had driven her into Richard's arms and then turned her against him. "Trust isn't the right word," I said. "But I think we understand each other now. And we want the same thing, at least in part." "Which is?" Claire asked. "Justice," I said. "For the families of Lakeside Estates. For everyone hurt by the company's actions over the years." Michael's face paled. "Mom, what exactly did you agree to?" I placed a hand on his arm. "Let's go home. There's a lot we need to discuss." The next few weeks were among the most difficult of my life. Once the decision was made to go public with the Lakeside cover-up, events moved with a momentum that was both terrifying and, in a strange way, liberating. Thomas was initially horrified by what we were planning. "Eleanor, this is corporate suicide," he warned. "The lawsuits alone will bankrupt the company, not to mention potential criminal charges." "I know the risks," I assured him, "but it's the right thing to do. And I believe we can find a way through this that honors our responsibilities to the victims while preserving what's worth saving of the company." Reluctantly, he helped us structure the Lakeside Victims Fund, with a board that included medical experts, legal advisors, and yes, Vivian Cross. The $10 million was just the beginning. We all knew that more would be needed as additional victims came forward and the full extent of the health impacts became clear. As promised, Vivian turned over everything she had: Richard's private files on Lakeside, medical records, internal memos discussing the contamination, and the decision to proceed with development anyway. It was damning, comprehensive evidence of a cover-up that had spanned more than a decade. With that evidence in hand, I went back to District Attorney Chen. This time, I wasn't there as a potential witness against Vivian, but as a whistleblower myself. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said after reviewing what I had brought her, "do you understand what you're doing? This goes far beyond the Riverside matter. The potential charges here could include criminal negligence resulting in death." "I understand," I said, "and I'm prepared to cooperate fully with any investigation, regardless of where it leads or who it implicates." She studied me with those penetrating eyes. "Including your son? Your late husband's associates? Yourself?" "Including everyone involved," I confirmed. "No one should be above accountability for what happened at Lakeside." The press conference announcing the Lakeside investigation was even more fraught than the one about Riverside had been. This time, I wasn't just admitting to bribery and corruption. I was revealing a cover-up that had resulted in illness and death, including children. The media coverage was intense and often brutal. "Blackwood Widow exposes deadly cover-up," screamed one headline. "Developer's toxic legacy revealed," proclaimed another. My face was suddenly everywhere, on television, in newspapers, online. But alongside the sensational headlines were stories about the victims, families like Vivian's sisters, who had lost loved ones to cancers and other illnesses potentially linked to the contamination. Their stories were heartbreaking, their courage in coming forward inspiring. And, to my surprise, there was also support. Not universal, not unqualified, but real. Community leaders praised the transparency, even while condemning the original cover-up. Environmental groups offered assistance with the testing and remediation efforts. Even some business publications noted the unusual and potentially transformative approach of a company voluntarily exposing its own wrongdoing and making amends. The legal consequences were as serious as we had anticipated. Multiple agencies launched investigations. Class action lawsuits were filed. The company's stock plummeted. Some longtime employees resigned in protest or fear, but others stayed. And, to my amazement, new people came, talented, idealistic professionals attracted by the commitment to change, to doing business differently. Michael, after his initial shock and resistance, threw himself into transforming the company's operations, implementing environmental and ethical standards that went far beyond regulatory requirements. Claire used her PR skills not to minimize the damage or spin the story, but to communicate honestly about both the past failures and the path forward. And I found myself in an unexpected role, not just as the company's owner or the whistleblower, but as an advocate for corporate accountability more broadly. Other companies facing similar issues began to reach out, seeking advice on how to address past wrongs, how to implement genuine change. It wasn't easy. There were days when the legal bills alone seemed insurmountable, when the public criticism was so harsh I could barely face leaving the house, when the scale of what needed to be done to make amends felt overwhelming. But there were other moments, like when the first Lakeside family received medical support from the fund, or when the remediation work began in earnest, or when a young employee thanked me for creating a company they could be proud to work for. That made it all worthwhile. 6 months after my confrontation with Vivian at the Lakeside Country Club, I stood in a courtroom watching her sentencing for her role in the Riverside corruption. She had pleaded guilty to reduced charges, and her cooperation with the investigations had been noted by the prosecution. "Ms. Cross," the judge said, "while the court acknowledges the personal tragedy that may have motivated your actions, it cannot excuse the laws you broke. However, in light of your cooperation and your current work with the Lakeside Victims Fund, I am sentencing you to 3 years probation and 1,000 hours of community service, to be served specifically in environmental remediation efforts." As Vivian turned to leave the courtroom, our eyes met briefly. There was no smile, no nod of acknowledgement. Our relationship defied simple categorization. We had been enemies, then reluctant collaborators, now something in between. United by tragedy, by Richard's manipulation, by a shared commitment to justice that had emerged from the most unlikely circumstances. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting, shouting questions about the sentence, about Vivian, about the ongoing investigations into Blackwood development. "Mrs. Blackwood," one called out, "do you think justice has been served today?" I paused, considering the question carefully. "Justice is a process, not a single outcome," I said finally. "What happened today is one small part of addressing wrongs that spanned decades and affected many lives. The real test will be in the work we continue to do, to support the victims, to clean up the contamination, to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." "And what about your husband's legacy?" another reporter asked. "Richard Blackwood was once considered a pillar of this community. How do you want him to be remembered now?" It was a question I had wrestled with often in the past months. The man I had married, the father of my children, the respected businessman, and the man who had betrayed his family, corrupted officials, and covered up deadly contamination. How could all of those aspects exist in one person? "Richard was a complex man," I said carefully. "He did both great good and great harm in his life. I don't believe it's my place to determine his legacy. History will judge him, as it judges all of us, by the totality of his actions and their impact on others." As the reporters pressed for more, I held up a hand. "That's all for today. Thank you." Walking to my car, I felt a familiar presence fall into step beside me. Thomas, loyal as ever despite everything that had happened. "You handled that well," he said. "The legacy question. It's one they'll keep asking." "I know," I sighed. "But I meant what I said. Richard's legacy isn't mine to define anymore." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "And what about your legacy, Eleanor?
Have you thought about that?"
The question caught me off guard. My legacy? For so long, I had defined myself in relation to Richard, his wife, his partner, the mother of his children. Even in these recent months of upheaval, my actions had been largely in response to his, exposing his wrongdoing, correcting his mistakes, making amends for harm he had caused. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I guess I've been so focused on fixing the past that I haven't thought much about the future." "Well, you should," Thomas said. "Because what you're doing now, It's remarkable. Not just the Lakeside Fund or the company reforms, but the way you faced everything head-on. With courage and integrity. I felt a warmth in my chest at his words.
Thank you, Thomas.
That means a lot, especially coming from you. He smiled, a hint of his old warmth returning. Just calling it like I see it. And speaking of the future, the board meeting is tomorrow. Are you ready? The board meeting, where we would be discussing the company's path forward, including the potential sale of certain assets to cover the mounting costs of litigation and remediation, where I would need to make decisions that would affect hundreds of employees, thousands of residents in Blackwood developments, millions of dollars in investments. I'm ready, I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. The Eleanor of a year ago would have been terrified by such responsibility. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The next morning, as I prepared for the meeting, I found myself drawn to Richard's study once more. I had spent so many hours there in recent months, poring over documents, searching for evidence, trying to understand the man I had been married to for nearly 4 decades. The room felt different now. Less intimidating, less a shrine to Richard's power and success. I had made it my own, in small ways, rearranging the furniture, adding plants, replacing the dark, heavy curtains with lighter ones that let in more natural light. On the desk sat a framed photo that I had recently rediscovered, Richard and me on our wedding day, young and hopeful, unaware of all that lay ahead. Beside it, a more recent addition, a simple plaque commemorating the establishment of the Lakeside Victims Fund. Past and present, side by side. The life I had lived and the life I was creating now. My phone buzzed with a message from Claire. On my way to pick you up for the meeting. Michael's already there. You ready for this? I smiled, typing back. Ready as I'll ever be. See you soon. As I gathered my things to leave, I caught a glimpse of myself in the study's ornate mirror, a woman in her 60s, silver streaking her dark hair, lines of experience etched around her eyes and mouth. Not young anymore, but not finished either. Not by a long shot. Goodbye, Richard, I said softly to the empty room. It's time for me to write my own story now. Outside, the day was bright and clear, full of possibility. I stepped into the sunlight, leaving the shadows of the past behind me. That evening, after a board meeting that had been challenging but ultimately productive, I returned home to find an unexpected delivery waiting for me, a small package with no return address. Inside was a velvet jewelry box containing a delicate silver locket, and with it, a handwritten note in a flowing script I recognized immediately. Eleanor, this belonged to my sister. Inside are pictures of Emma and Lily. I've carried it for years as a reminder of why I did what I did. Now, I think it should belong to you, a reminder of why we're doing what we're doing now. Some forms of revenge destroy us. Others transform us. I'm beginning to understand the difference. With trembling fingers, I opened the locket to find 2 tiny photographs of smiling little girls, their whole lives ahead of them. Lives cut tragically short by the greed and negligence of the man I had married, the company I now led. Tears filled my eyes as I carefully closed the locket and fastened it around my neck. It felt right there, close to my heart, a weight, yes, but also a purpose. A reminder, as Vivian had said, of why all of this mattered. I walked to the window, looking out at the city Richard had helped build, the skyline dotted with Blackwood developments. So much of it tainted now by what we knew, by truths long buried but finally exposed. And yet, there was also hope. In the remediation work already underway at Lakeside. In the new policies being implemented at the company. In the fund bringing support to families who had suffered in silence for too long. My phone rang, Claire, checking in after the board meeting, wanting to know if I needed anything. My daughter, who had stood by me through all of this, who had shown a strength and integrity that made me prouder than I could express. I'm fine, I assured her, just taking a moment to reflect. On what? I touched the locket at my throat, thinking of all that had happened, all that was still to come. On endings, I said. And beginnings. After we hung up, I remained at the window, watching as the sun set over Meridian Heights, casting long shadows across the landscape. In the gathering dusk, I could just make out the distant shimmer of lakeside, the water reflecting the first stars of evening. It was beautiful, despite everything. Beautiful and broken and slowly healing, like so many things in this world. Like me. The doorbell rang, startling me from my reverie. It was late for visitors, especially unexpected ones. For a moment, I hesitated, remembering other unexpected visits. Vivian after the will reading, threatening me in my own home. But I was not afraid anymore. Whatever came, I would face it. I opened the door to find no one there. Only a single red rose on the step, its petals intact and perfect. And tied to its stem, a small card with familiar handwriting. "This isn't over, old woman. But perhaps it's just beginning." I picked up the rose, feeling its weight in my hand, its thorns pressing against my fingers without breaking the skin. Not a threat this time, but something else. An acknowledgement, perhaps. A truce of sorts. Or maybe even, in its own strange way, a promise. I closed the door slowly, holding the rose to the light, watching as its deep red petals caught the glow of the lamp. Then I placed it in a vase on the hall table, where its beauty could be appreciated, its thorns respected. Some endings were also beginnings. Some enemies became, if not friends, then something more complex and valuable. Some tragedies, even the most painful ones, could lead to healing and change. And sometimes, a woman who had spent her life in someone else's shadow could step into the light and find her own strength, her own voice, her own way forward. That woman was me, Eleanor Blackwood. Not just Richard's widow anymore, but myself. Flawed and resilient and determined to make whatever amends I could for the past while building something better for the future. It wasn't the life I had expected. But standing there in the quiet of my home, the weight of the locket against my heart, the scent of the rose filling the air, I knew it was the life I was meant to live now. My story, my choice, my legacy. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt exactly right.